So hi everyone, I'm going to wait a little bit longer just in case there are some more students trying to get in, and then we will get started. Okay, so hi everyone, welcome back. If you haven't attended our other two sessions and you don't know who I am, I'm Evelyn. I'm studying for my Masters in Maths at university. The last two sessions, we had a look at solving linear equations and solving simultaneous equations. We're going to start today's session with going through the recap of yesterday's session, but the remainder of the lesson will be focused on solving quadratic equations. So let's start with our recap. So solving simultaneous equations, we had a look at solving the standard simultaneous equations. So that's when you have two linear equations and you need to work out what is x and what is y. In order to do that, you need to make sure that the coefficients of either x or y are the same. Then if those numbers have the same sign, you're going to subtract the equations if they have opposite signs. So let's say if one is positive, the other one is negative, we're going to add. And then you solve for that letter, whether it's x or y. And once you have one of those values, you can substitute that value back into the original equation and find the other one. So we had a look at that yesterday. We're going to go through a recap question on that in a second as well. But we also had a look at solving simultaneous equations graphically as well. So remember, to do that, you'll draw the set of axes, plot the graphs, and then the solution for x and y will be where the two lines cross. And also yesterday we had a look at solving those harder simultaneous equations. So that was with one quadratic equation and one linear equation. That's only for the higher paper. And to do that, you would solve by substitution. So you would substitute the linear equation into the quadratic equation and then solve the quadratic. Now, some of you might have found that step a little bit difficult because you might have forgotten how to solve quadratics, but we're going to go through that later in today's session. So before we move on to solving quadratics, let's do a quick recap question on solving simultaneous equations. So I would like everyone to have a go at answering this question for me. Remember, make sure either the coefficients of x, so the numbers in front of the x or the numbers in front of the y, are the same, and then decide whether you are going to add or subtract the two equations and then solve. So everyone have a go at this question for me. Once you've figured out the answers or once you have some answers, put your answers in the chat. Brilliant, so we've already got some answers. Also, if you have any questions throughout the session, make sure you put them in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, I might not be able to see it because there's loads of answers flowing in through the chat. So make sure you separate them. Answers in the chat, questions in the Q&A section. So I'm seeing some good answers. I'll wait a little bit longer for some more because I know some of you will still be working it out. And then in a few moments, I will walk through it with everyone. Right, brilliant. I think majority of the answers that I'm getting are correct, which is excellent. Right, so just because we have so many sort of different types of methods with quadratic equations to go through in our session today, I'm going to start going through the walkthrough of this question. Anyone who's still trying it out, still go ahead and see whether you get the same answer as me when I get to the end. So we've got our two linear equations. So we're going to use the method of elimination. So I want to make either my x's the same or my y's the same, then I need to choose whether to add or subtract them. So looking at these two equations, I think the easiest thing that I could do is make my y's the same. So my first equation, I've got 4y. In my second equation, I've got minus y. So I can multiply my second equation by 4. So I can make that into a 4y instead. Now remember, I have to multiply the entire equation. So I'm still going to have my 2x plus 4y equals 26 because I'm not doing anything with the first equation. But my second equation, I'm going to get 12x minus 4y equals 16 because we've got 3x times 4, which is 12x, minus y times 4, which is minus 4y, and 4 times 4, which is 16. Now, I've got 4y and a minus 4y. Now, they're opposite signs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my two equations together. So 2x plus 12x gives me 14x. 4y plus minus 4y gives me 0. And 26 plus 16 gives me 42. So I've got 14x equals 42. And then to finish solving, I just divide both sides by 14. And I'll get x equals, and 42 divided by 14 is 3. So x equals 3. Brilliant. Now, the last thing I need to do is take my x equals 3 and substitute it into one of these two equations to work out what y is going to be. So the easiest equation I could choose is the second one. So I'm going to substitute it into this second one. So I've got 3 times 3 minus y equals 4. So I've got 3 times 3, which is 9, minus y equals 4. And then if I move that 9, so I can subtract 9 on both sides, I've got minus y equals 4 minus 9. 4 minus 9 is minus 5. And remember, I want to know what y is equal to, not what minus y is equal to. So the final thing that I need to do is y equals 5. Because if minus y equals minus 5, then y has to equal to 5. So brilliant for everyone who got those answers. I think majority of you did. X equals 3 and y equals 5. That is fantastic. Right, so that's our recap of simultaneous equations. And remember, just to check your answers as well, you could take that first equation and substitute in x equals 3 and y equals 5 just to see whether you got the answer right, and you will get 26 when you do that. So in today's session, what we'll be doing is we will be solving quadratic equations using the following methods. So we'll be solving by factorising, solving by the difference of two squares, and then for the higher students, we'll also be looking at solving by completing the square and by the quadratic formula as well. So just to answer one question that's come through, someone asked, could you not just rearrange the second equation into y equals 3x minus 4 and then substitute? Yeah, that's absolutely fine. As long as you're using that same equation and you haven't changed any of the values by accident, then that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so everyone can see it a little bit clearer. There we go. Right, so what is a quadratic equation? A quadratic equation contains terms up to x squared. So all quadratic equations can be written in this form. So ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Where a, b, and c are numbers. Yeah, so you could have x squared minus 2x equals 3. That's a quadratic equation. You could have x squared equals 36, or 8x squared minus 4x, or 8x squared equals minus 4x. Now, all of those you can see have an x squared in there, meaning that it's a quadratic equation. So that's different from what we were having a look at in our first session on Monday. Now, a lot of you have seen a quadratic equation before and have tried solving it. And this is probably the most popular method for solving quadratic equations. So the first thing that you do when you're solving by factorising is you rearrange the quadratic equation so that you have x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You always have to make sure your quadratic equation equals to 0 before you start solving. Otherwise, you might get the question wrong and you might get the wrong answers. Once you've made it equal to 0, then you need to find two numbers that multiply to make c and also add to make b, and then you form two brackets and put those numbers in the brackets with your x's. Once you've then done that, the last thing to solve is to set each bracket equal to 0 and then solve for x. So we're going to have a look at an example question, and we're going to go through the first question with you, and then I'll ask you guys to go through the second question by yourselves. So the first question, if we have a look, we've got x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. First thing to think about, it's already set equal to 0, so we don't have to rearrange anything. That's already done for us. The next thing, I need to think of two numbers that multiply to give me 8 and add to give me 6. Well, the two numbers that come to mind is 2 and 4. If I check, 2 times 4 gives me 8 and 2 plus 4 equals 6. So 2 and 4 are definitely going to be the numbers I'm going to use. And then to put them into brackets, I'm going to have two sets of brackets like this. I'm going to have my x's, and then I'm going to do x plus 2 and x plus 4, since 2 and 4 are both positive numbers. Got x plus 2 and x plus 4. And I'm going to make sure that I put equals to 0. And then the last thing to solve, I take each bracket, I'll do it in a different color as well. I take each bracket and I set it equal to 0. So my first bracket is x plus 2, that equals to 0. And then I've got x plus 4 equals 0 as well, because that's my second bracket. Now the last thing to do is to solve. So if x plus 2 equals 0, I can subtract 2 on both sides. So x equals minus 2, and I can do the same thing with the other one as well. X plus 4 equals 0, so I can subtract 4 on both sides, so I will get x equals minus 4. So that's how we would solve quadratic equations by factorising. So I'd like you guys to have a go at doing the second equation for me. So x squared minus 3x minus 28 equals 0. So someone asks, can you get quadratic equations in a non-calculator paper for higher level students? In the higher exam, you could get any type of quadratic equation in either the non-calculator paper or the calculator paper. So being able to solve quadratic equations without a calculator is important for higher students. Also, it's important, this also comes up in the foundation paper as well. So anyone who is doing foundation, you need to know this as well. But all higher students, you need to know how to do everything that we're going through today. And it will come up in both papers, or it could come up in both papers. Right, so some of you guys' answers are looking really good. And make sure to put your answers in the chat just so I can separate questions from answers. Right, let's have a look. Let's go through it. So I want to think, so already, first of all, it's set equal to 0. Then I need to think of two numbers that multiply to give me minus 28 and add together to give me minus 3. So I've got minus 7 and I've got 4. Those are the two numbers that I think will probably work. Always check whether they do work or not as well, by the way. So -7 times 4 equals -28, so that's brilliant. And -7 plus 4 gives me -3, which is also really good. So I've got my two numbers, -7 and 4. Now those are the numbers that I put into my brackets. So I've got x minus 7 and x plus 4 equals to 0. And then the last step to make sure that you are solving properly, my answer is not going to be -7 and 4. I need to solve it. So I need to set each bracket equal to 0 first. So I've got x minus 7 equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0. So then I add 7 to both sides for the left equation. So I've got x equals 7. Oops, pen's gone a bit funny. And then on the right equation, I subtract 4 on both sides. So it'll be x equals -4. So you should get x equals 7 and x equals -4. So some of you got the negative numbers switched around. So some of you said -7 and 4. Make sure you finish your equation by solving it. So setting each bracket equal to 0 rather than just taking those numbers that are in the brackets. Right, brilliant. So we're going to move on to difference of two squares. I'm going to try and answer some more questions before we go on to this. So someone said, how much of the maths paper do we have to get right to get a grade 9? Quite a lot, pretty much, majority of the questions. Also, grade boundaries change depending on the grades that people get as well. So it's not a set number of times. It's not a set number of questions, sorry, or a set number of marks. That's always the same year by year. It does change depending on how everyone's doing in that year. So I will answer a few more questions after I go through this difference of two squares part. So again, everyone needs to know this one as well. Difference of two squares means one square term subtracts another square term. So if the quadratic is in this form, so x squared minus a squared equals 0, where a is just another normal number, then it can be factorized in this form. So x plus a, x minus a equals 0. And then to solve, again, just like what we did before, set each bracket equal to 0 and then continue to solve. So we're going to have a look at this one together. So I've got x squared minus 81 equals 0. So first of all, it's equal to 0. The second thing is I have to check, are both my terms a square number? Well, x squared is square because it's x squared. And 81 is a squared number. It's the same as 9 squared. So since 81 is a square number, what I can do is I can split it into two brackets, and I'm going to put the square root of 81 into my brackets. So I'm going to have x plus 9 and x minus 9, because 9 times 9 gives me 81. So these are going to be my brackets. And then the last thing to do is to solve, just like how we did last time. So I've got x plus 9 equals 0, so my bracket equals 0, and then my second bracket equals 0. One, I can subtract 9 on both sides, so I've got x equals minus 9. And then on the second one, I can add 9, add 9 onto both sides. So I've got x equals 9. So your solution will be x equals minus 9 or x equals 9. So using these steps, just going to go up a bit. Using these steps, what I'd like you guys to do is have a go at this example question on the right over here. A little hint is to make sure your equation equals to 0 first. So you're going to have to rearrange this equation in some way to make sure it equals to 0 and then solve it. So while you guys are doing that, I will answer some more questions. So someone said, do you need to show your working out for these questions, and how many marks would these types of questions be worth? Right. These types of questions would probably be worth around 2 to 3 marks, depending on how much rearranging you need to do. I would always suggest show you're working out for everything. The reason why is if you just write down the answer because you think you know the answer, you're quite confident. It's good that you're confident, but the only thing is, if you get the question wrong, you accidentally write down the wrong number, you're going to get that entire question wrong, and you might not get any marks because they might think that you're just guessing rather than trying to calculate it. As long as you write down your working, you will get method marks. You'll get some sort of marks for using the right method or using the right sort of process to calculating it. So you can pick up a few marks even if you do make a silly mistake. If you don't write down your working out, you won't get any marks if you do make a silly mistake. So always write down your working out. Try not to do anything in your head either, because with exam pressure and nerves, you might make a silly mistake very easily without noticing it. So someone said, when we start the higher tier questions, is there no going back to foundation? Well, in the quiz, we're going to have some questions based on, like, say, solving what we just did, solving by factorising and the difference of two squares. So it's not necessarily we won't go back to foundation stuff, but after this section, we will be focusing on some of the higher tier only. So if you want to participate in the quiz, you can stick around for that as well. Brilliant. So I'm seeing some really good answers as well. We are going to be doing the Kahoot later. Let's go through this first. Let's go through the answers. I'm seeing some really good answers here. So my little hint that I was trying to give was that, remember, we always have to make sure that equation equals to 0. So we're going to have to rearrange. Now, really, to make it equal to 0, I just have to get rid of this minus 49. So I'm going to add 49 to both sides. So I'm going to get x squared, and then minus 74 plus 49 gives me minus 25. And on the right hand side, I've got 0 because I've got minus 49 plus 49. That just gives me 0, yeah? Now, if I check these two terms, x squared is square, 25 is also square because the square root of 25 is 5. So I can split it into these two brackets, x plus 5 and x minus 5 equals 0. And then remember, set each bracket equal to 0 and then solve. So on the left hand side, I can subtract 5 on both sides. So you've got x equals minus 5. And then on the right hand side, I can add 5 to both sides. So x equals positive 5. So that would be my two answers. So brilliant. Right, let's move on. So this is for higher only, the higher exam only. Foundation students do not need to know this. Right. The first factorising questions that we did, that was only when we had an x squared and then plus bx plus c. With these harder factorising questions, instead of having an x squared, instead now you have a number in front of that x squared. So we've got an ax squared, so a number being multiplied by it. And the way how we solve this is a little bit different from the way how we solve the first few questions. So there's loads of different methods that some students find more comfortable answering the questions. I'm just going to go through this one because it's the most popular one. In order to work out how to factorize these questions and solve it by factorizing, we first take that a, so this number, and we're going to multiply it by c and figure out whatever that calculation would be. Then we need to find two numbers that multiply to make this number that we just made, and that add to give me b. And then I'm going to split my bx, factorize the expressions to form two brackets and set each bracket equal to 0, just like before, and solve. And then remember to check your answer at the end. So you can always substitute it to make sure that you check that it is the correct answers. We're going to go through an example and then I'll let you have a go yourself. So here's one example of one question which might come up in your higher exam paper. Right, let me zoom in a little bit so everyone can see it a bit clearer. Right. So we've got 2x squared plus 5x plus 2 equals 0. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take this 2 and this 2, that's my A and my C, and I'm going to multiply them together. So 2 times 2 gives me 4. Yeah. Now I need to think of two numbers that multiply to give me 4 and add to give me 5. Now the two numbers that I can think of is 4 and 1. 4 times 1 gives me 4 and 4 plus 1 gives me 5. So those are the two numbers I'm going to use. Now the one mistake which a lot of students get into is they put these numbers into the brackets. That's not what we're going to do here. We're going to do something else. We're going to split this 5x into 4x plus 1x, because those are the two numbers that I came up with, 4 and 1. So instead, I'm going to change this equation into 2x plus 4x plus x plus 2 equals to 0. So remember, if I was to collect those terms in the middle, 4x and x, that would just give me 5x. So I've still got exactly the same equation. I've just split it so that I can factorize it in a little bit of an easier way. Now, what I'm going to do now, just to make it clearer for everyone to see what I'm going to do when I'm factorizing, I'm just going to put a line down the middle here. Now I'm going to factorize the left-hand side of this line, and then I'm going to factorize the right-hand side of this line, and then I'll show you what to do with this. So on the left-hand side, to fully factorize it, I need to find common things in both terms. So both terms are even numbers, so I could take 2 outside the bracket, and both terms have an x in it, so I can also take an x outside the bracket. So I've got 2x outside the bracket. What's going to go inside the bracket is an x plus 2, because remember, 2x squared divided by 2x will give me an x, and 4x divided by 2x will give me a 2. So this is this left-hand expression factorized fully. Now on the right hand side, there's no common factors in x and in 2. So I'm just going to have in brackets x plus 2. Yeah, and it's positive. So I've still got this add. Yeah, so this is still equal to 0. Now the last step to actually get my expression or my equation into brackets is this bracket is equal to this bracket over here. So that's going to be my first bracket in my solution. And then my second bracket is going to be the numbers that I'm multiplying those brackets by. So it's going to be 2x, because that's the term that I'm multiplying the first bracket by. So I'm going to put 2x into the brackets. Then over here, it looks like I don't have anything, but remember, there's like this imaginary 1 there because I have one bracket. So it's plus 1 equals to 0. So I've got x plus 2 and 2x plus 1 equals 0. Now this looks very similar to the brackets that we had in the first time round. So we're going to set each bracket just like before, set each bracket equal to 0 and then solve. So the first bracket is x plus 2 equals 0. And the second bracket is 2x plus 1 equals to 0. Now the left one, I just need to subtract 2 on both sides, so I get x equals minus 2. But the right one is a little bit more tricky. I need to subtract 1 on both sides first, so I get 2x equals minus 1. And then I divide both sides by 2, so that I get x equals to something. So I now have x equals minus 1 divided by 2, which is just minus 1 over 2, or minus a half. Yeah, and those would be that would be your solution. So just zooming out so you can see everything. That would be your solution: x equals minus 2, x equals minus a half. Now if you substituted these values into the original equation, you'll realize that it is correct. You would get 0, and then you'd be able to work out and check your answers thoroughly. So hopefully this makes some sense. What I would like you guys to do is have a go. I'm going to zoom in again. Have a go at doing this question for me. Remember, find your A and your C, multiply them together, Once you've worked out what that number is going to be, you want to find two numbers that multiply to give you that number and add together to give you minus 19. And then you're going to split your middle term and factorize. So have a go at this. I know that it is really tricky, but I'd like you guys to have a go either way. We're still going to go through it. So just have a guess and try it out. So someone had a good tip. So someone said, have you heard of the team method? So two numbers at times to make end and two numbers that add to make middle. That is a brilliant example. That's fantastic. So anyone who's heard of that, that's really helpful as well. Someone asked, will we be doing completing the square today? Yes, we're going to have a look at completing the square next. But we won't be going through too many questions just because of time, because there are so many methods to go through. Someone said, can the answers be decimal numbers? So I'm guessing for the difference of two squares, that question was for. You can have decimal numbers. There's nothing stopping you from having decimal numbers, especially in the higher paper. It could be either or. It could be whole numbers, it could be decimal numbers. For higher students, it could also be surds. So make sure that the way how they're asking you to leave the question, you leave it in that format as well. So someone asked, do you know any good websites to find GCSE practice questions for specific topics? There will be a revision session on the 28th. But to answer your question now, the different websites I can think of from the top of my head, there's Corbett Maths. I don't know whether anyone's heard of Corbett Maths before. That has quite a lot of like topic specific questions. Also Maths Genie is really good as well, because that splits it down into the different levels. So topics which are level 1 all the way up until level 9 topics. That's also really good. I think there's a few more. Mr. Barton Maths. If you like to watch videos as well, Khan Academy is a good one to help you. If you like to watch someone going through the questions and answering them, that's a good one as well. Someone said, what exam board is this? All of these questions come up in all exam boards. So all of these different methods are for all exam boards, regardless of which one you're taking. The exam boards rarely change a lot. In the maths particularly in maths, the exam boards don't change as much, but everything that we've gone through from Wednesday up until today is covered in all exam boards, so don't worry about that. Someone else said Dr. Frost Maths is also good. Yeah, that one's a good one as well. So someone said, what do you do after you multiply the A and the C? Once you multiply the A and the C, you're looking for two numbers that multiply to give you that number and add to give you that minus 19. So that's what you're looking for next once you've done that. Yeah, Maths Made Easy is also another good one as well. That one's really good. There's loads of websites. Literally just put in GCSE Maths and then whatever topic you're looking for, and there'll be a whole Google search of different websites which are really good. Right, I'll wait a little bit longer. Yep, Hegarty Maths is also a really good one as well. So for the last question, everyone, it was plus 5x, not a minus 5x. I think it's just because I drew over it by accident when I was circling the 5x. But it was a plus and not a minus. Right. just for time, I'm going to start going through this question now. I'm seeing some really good answers in the chat as well. So first of all, we find that A and that C and we multiply them together. So 4 times -5 equals -20. And then I need two numbers that multiply to give me -20 and add together to give me -19. Now, two numbers that I can think of which do that is -20 and 1. -20 times 1 equals -20, and -20 plus 1 gives me -19. So I know these are the two numbers that I'm going to end up using. So I've got -20 and 1. Now remember, I'm going to use these numbers to split that -19x. So I've still got 4x squared, but now I'm going to have -20x plus x minus 5 equals 0. Now, a little method just to help me factorize a little bit better is to draw a line down the middle, and then I can factorize the left-hand side and the right-hand side. The left-hand side fully factorized. I know 4 is a common factor in both terms, and I've got an x in both terms as well. So inside the brackets, I'm going to have x minus 5. And then on the right hand side, there's no common factors between x and -5. So I'm just going to have in brackets x minus 5. And remember, this is positive as well. And then I can set it equal to 0. And then the last thing to find my two brackets, I have two brackets which are exactly the same. So that's going to be my first bracket. And then my second bracket is going to be the terms that I multiply each bracket by. So I've got 4x, and then remember there's this imaginary 1 here. So I've got 4x plus 1 equals 0. And then the final thing to do to solve is to set each bracket equal to 0. So I've got x minus 5 equals to 0, and 4x plus 1 equals to 0, and then solve fully. So I can add 5 to both sides on the left-hand side. So I've got x equals to 5. And on the right-hand side, I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides. So I've got 4x equals -1. And then I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides. So I've got x equals -1/4 or -1/4, however you'd like to say it. And this would be your solution, x equals 5 and x equals -1/4. So well done for you guys who got that answer. Hopefully solving these harder quadratic equations makes a little bit more sense. It does come with practice. It is a very tricky topic. So I would suggest anyone who found it a little bit difficult, remember this is being recorded. You can go back and watch it again just to go through the methods and then practice it as well with some example questions. So another topic which we're going to go through as well today for higher students again only is solving by completing the square. Now solving by completing the square is quite tricky as well, and it's usually in this sort of form. The way to complete the square is to take b and half it, and then in the brackets you're going to have x plus b over 2. So once you've halved b, you're going to have x plus b over 2 squared, like the whole bracket squared. Then you're going to take away this whole term squared, and then you're going to add your c on the end and it equals to 0, and then you simplify. And then finally to solve, you'll rearrange and solve for x just as you did before. So make sure that when you're square rooting numbers, the square root of a number, you get both the positive and the negative value. So just as an example, if you've got something like x squared equals 25, if you use your calculator will tell you that x equals 5. That's not necessarily wrong, but that's not the only answer that you should get. You should also get x equals -5, because remember, -5 times -5 gives you 25. Two negative numbers being multiplied gives you a positive. So your calculator will only give you the positive value. Always remember, when you square root a number, you also get the negative version as well. So that's really important. Now, I'm going to go through this question with you just because of time. And I'll show you how to complete the square using this, and then we will move on to using the quadratic formula, and then we'll go on to the quiz. Right, so some of your questions at GCSE, if they want you to solve by completing the square, they'll make it very clear that you need to use that method to solve. Yeah, some students like to use it because they might enjoy using that method to solve. But in general, it's not a very popular method because it is quite tricky. But sometimes this is a past paper question. You might get a question like this. So it's not asking you to solve because it's not an equation. It doesn't equal to 0, but it's asking you to write this expression in this form. And this form looks just like completing the square. You have x plus something in brackets squared plus something else. That's the form that you get when you complete the square. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Right, b is 8. Remember, what goes inside the brackets is x plus half of b. So in the brackets, we're going to have x plus half of 8. Half of 8 is 4 squared. And then remember, we have to subtract this number in the brackets squared and then add on our c. So 4 squared is 16. So we're going to subtract 16. And then we're going to add on that 5 that we had in the original expression. And then to simplify it fully, we've got x plus 4 squared, and then minus 16 plus 5 is minus 11. So that would be your answer. X equals 4 squared minus 11. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense on how to complete the square. I'm sorry we can't go through another example question just because of time, but always remember you half b and then you take away whatever that value is squared and add it on to c at the end, and make sure you simplify it fully. Now, we're going to have a look at the quadratic formula. This is the last sort of algebraic method that you need to know in the higher exam, how to solve quadratic equations. And sometimes a lot of students like to use it because it's very clear. It's always one method and you just put the numbers in, and a lot of the time in a calculator paper you can just put it into the calculator. The one place where a lot of students fall short is forgetting to make sure that your quadratic equation equals to 0 first. Always make sure it equals to 0 first of all. Then once it's equal to 0, you can figure out what is the value of A, what is B, and what is C. Once you know what A, B, and C are, you substitute them into this formula over here. Minus B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC, everything divided by 2A. And then once you do that, you'll come up with two values. You'll come up with one value for X and another value for X. And the way how you would calculate it is the first one would be x equals minus b plus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. And the second one would be minus b minus the square root of b squared. So for those of you who aren't really familiar with this, when it says plus or minus, it means do one time adding those two parts together, and the second time you subtract it. That's how you get two different solutions. So you've got, if I use a pointer, you've got your add and then you've got your subtract, and then you get two different values for x. Yeah. So if we were to do this one, what I'd like you guys to do is find out what your two solutions of x would be for this equation. It's already set equal to 0, so all you need to do is work out what is A, what is B, and what is C. That part should be quite simple, and then substitute it into the correct equation and do one value when you have a plus, one value when you have a minus. What I'll do, just as a hint, I'll write down the equation for you. So x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So what is a, what is b, what is c, and then substitute it into your calculator and leave your answer in the correct format, please. And I'll go through and answer some more questions. Right. Someone's recommending the GCSE Maths Tutor YouTube channel. I've seen some of those videos. That one is also good as well. Brilliant. Someone said, what grade is this? This, right, this is probably a grade, completing the square is probably about grade 7 or 8, I'm thinking. Quadratic formula is probably grade 6 or grade 7. I can't say that I'm 100% certain, but also what I like to point out is bear in mind that depending on the type of question they're asking you, it could change what grade the question is. So even though this is for higher students, if they ask you this question in a problem solving sort of way, it could come up at the end of the paper. So it could be something like a grade 8 or a grade 9 question, just because of how the question is being presented to you. So some of these topics, yes, they are higher grades, but depending on how they're being asked can change what grade the question is. So someone asks, will you be asked to solve using completing the square? Yes, you might be asked to solve using the complete the square. You might be asked to solve using the quadratic formula. When you're solving, I know that someone asked about solving using graphs. We won't be able to go through that today. But for higher students, when you're using the graph to find turning points or roots and whatnot, sometimes you have to use certain methods, like say completing the square or factorising, to be able to find those points on a quadratic graph. So there are times where you will be asked to use particular methods. Remember, if you did miss anything, it is being recorded and it will be on the YouTube channel. So make sure to re-watch it if you do need to see anything else. Yes, you do need a calculator to answer this question, unless you have an amazing brain where you could work out the square root of odd numbers, which would be fantastic, but you're not expected to. So if you do have a calculator, that would be handy. Right, someone asked a good question. Does B have the X with it, or is it just a number? B is just the number. So I'm going to go through this question now so we can get to the quiz. But for this question, your A would be 1. You're multiplying your X squared with a 1. There is that imaginary 1 in algebra that's sometimes easy to forget. Your B in this case will be 5. It won't be 5x, it will just be 5. And your C will be 3. And then you put it into this equation. So you've got x equals minus 5 plus or minus. What I'll do is I will separate the plus and minus, so it's easier to tell what I'm doing. So I've got minus 5 plus the square root of 5 squared minus 4. And I'm going to put this in brackets, 4 times a, which is 1, and c, which is 3, all divided by 2 times 1, which is just 2. So that will be your answer. Once you put that into the calculator, that will be your answer for one of the x's. Your other x will be minus 5 minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3, all divided by 2. So if I use my calculator quickly just to work that out. So you've got minus 5 Cool. So your first answer should be minus 0.7. Oops, minus 0.7. And your second answer should be minus 4.3. So remember, the question is asking to leave your solution correct to two decimal places. Yeah. So the best way to leave it, which a lot of you have done, is when it says two decimal places, even though it rounds up to a one decimal place number, it's always good to put those zeros on the end as well, just to make sure you have two decimal places so that you're showing the examiner you read the question, you know that you're supposed to be rounding it to two decimal places, but it rounds up to one anyways. Brilliant. Right. Before we move on to the quiz, I just want to go through a few tips. Always make sure your equations equal 0 before you start solving. To solve quadratic equations using the difference of two squares, it helps to remember your square numbers. Make sure you're familiar with those, otherwise it will be a bit trickier to spot difference of two squares questions. And always substitute your answers back into the original equations to check that you are correct. With solving questions, it's usually easier to find out that you've gotten your question right by substituting your answers in. So for the remaining part of the lesson, we will be going through the quiz. I like everyone to log in. The pin is on the screen. If you can't log in, if you're finding it a bit tricky to log into Kahoot, don't worry, the pin will still be at the bottom of the screen as the quiz goes on. I won't lock it. And also, if you're still having a bit more troubles, just put your answers in the chat and I'll be checking those as well. If you did find today's session a bit tricky, I know that it's really tough because this stuff is higher only, majority of the stuff is higher only content. What I would suggest is re-watching it if there are things that you've missed or things that you'd like to go over again. Right, just for time's sake, I'm going to start it now. You can still log in throughout the session as well. So I'm going to start it. Right, solving quadratic equations. Right, have a go at solving this equation. So this is a standard quadratic equation to solve. You can solve by factorising. So someone asked a good question about the harder factorising questions. They said, will the second part of the equation always end in +1? So when we took those two brackets and then we said, okay, we've got 4x and then that second bracket is being multiplied by that imaginary one. No, sometimes you have it being multiplied by 3. Sometimes it's multiplied by a 12 or something like that. Always check what the bracket is being multiplied by. Right, 12. If we have a look at it, the two numbers that multiply to give me a positive 35 and add to give me a negative 12, it will be -7 and -5. So brilliant. Well done for those of you who spotted that. Well done to the top 5. Oops. Well done to the top 5. Let's go on to the next question. Right, solve this equation. Remember the one important thing when solving quadratic equations. So someone asked a question, if you take away numbers with indices with the same number, so like say 5 to the power of 20 minus 5 to the power of 19, does it equal that number? Like, does it equal 5? No, it doesn't necessarily. So have a think about 2 cubed minus 2 squared. 2 cubed is 8, 2 squared is 4. When we take that away, it gives me 4, not 2. So be very careful when you're working with indices. Brilliant. X equals 6 and x equals minus 6. So remember, subtract that 228 because it always has to equal to 0 first. You're going to get minus 36, and then the square root of 36 is 6. So your two solutions will be 6 and minus 6. Brilliant. Well done to the top 5. Right, next question, true or false? So one of the solutions to 2x squared minus 7x equals minus 15 equals 0 is x equals 3. Is that true or is it false? So someone asked, will you be given the quadratic formula in an exam? I think this one depends on your exam board. So I think for Edexcel, you need to know it. Brilliant, it is false. The way to check it is just put x equals 3 into the equation and it won't equal to 0. So that's a good way to check whether something is a solution or not. So remember, when you're calculating things, always check your answers. Well done to the top 5. True or false? There is only one solution to this equation. Is it true or is it false? So yeah, the quadratic formula, I remember in the old spec, they gave you quite a lot of formulae when answering questions. However, now it's not the case. So I think you do have to remember the quadratic formula. You will not necessarily be given it. So someone was asking about the first question. So remember, you had to get two numbers that multiply to 35 and add to give you minus 12. So it wouldn't be two positive numbers, it'll be two negative numbers. Brilliant, this one is true. If I factorize it, I'll get x minus 8 and x minus 8. And when I solve it, I'll get x equals 8 for both of them. So they're both exactly the same. So I've only got one solution, x equals 8, because there's only one number that x could be equal to. So this one would be true. Brilliant. Right. For some of these questions, just because of time, I might skip some of them. These ones you can definitely have a go at. So which of the following is a method for solving quadratic equations? Brilliant, it's the difference of two squares. The difference of two cubes doesn't exist. Completing the rectangle and completing the triangle are also incorrect. It should be completing the square. And the difference of two squares is definitely a method. So brilliant, well done for the top 5. Some of the calculation questions I will skip, like say for this one, for instance. Sorry guys. Just because of time. Have a go at this question, however. I would like you guys to have a go at working out what this one would be. I'm going to try and answer some more questions if there are any. So someone asks, is A-level maths really hard and different compared to GCSE maths? A-level maths is definitely different compared to GCSE maths. GCSE maths is very focused on learning how to do a method and then using that method to answer a question. A-level maths is more learn how to do a method and then you need to apply that method to answer different questions which you might not have seen before. So A-level maths is more tricky. It is at A-level. It is a little bit more tricky than GCSE maths. But if you like GCSE maths and you're really good at it, you'll probably really like A-level maths as well and do quite well. It's just a different way of thinking and a different way of applying your knowledge to answering questions. Right, let's see what answers you got here. Brilliant, x equals 0.8. So you would go ahead and solve and try and multiply 5 and minus 12. It'll give you minus 60. Two numbers that multiply to give you minus 60 and add to give you 11. Split that 11x and then make two brackets and solve. So brilliant, well done for the top 5 here. True or false, you need to rearrange the quadratic equation so that it's equal to 0 before you begin to solve. True or false? Someone said apparently you get to choose mechanics or statistics at maths A level. Is that true? Not necessarily. It depends on the specification that you've chosen or that your school is doing. Some specifications you have to do both. Some specifications you can choose. Also, it depends whether you do further maths as well, because you might get to choose there. Brilliant, it's true. Always set it equal to 0 before you start solving. It's very important. Brilliant. And second to last question. For higher students, questions that require the quadratic formula only come up in the calculator paper. Is that true or is that false? Someone asks, what is mechanics and statistics? Mechanics is more like physics type questions based on motion and forces. Statistics is based on probability and data. Brilliant, it is false. It might come up in the non-calculator paper. Higher students, you also need to know how to work with surds. So your answers might be, you might be asked to leave your answer in terms of a surd. So be careful, don't only practice quadratic formula questions with a calculator, make sure you practice them with that one as well. The last question for today, if I were to use a quadratic formula to answer the following, what are the values of A, B, and C? Someone asks, how can you revise maths? There is going to be a revision session on the 28th. You should have some information about it because it's you should be able to access it just like how you've accessed this session, but it's not the same link. Don't get that confused. But the best way is to practice questions and make sure you go over things which you find tricky and make sure you understand it as well. Right, A equals 3, B equals 2, and C equals minus 15. Remember, if we have a look, it has to equal 0. You have to set it equal to 0 first. So you subtract 2x on both sides and you subtract 2 on both sides and you'll get A equals 3, B equals 2, C equals minus 15. So I'm very sorry that we've gone over a little bit, but thank you everyone for participating. Well done, third place to Shish, second place to Me is Amazing, and first place to Full Stop. Runners up as well, Dominique and Myth. I hope everyone enjoyed the sessions. I hope all of you have a wonderful Christmas as well and a good New Year's, and hopefully see you guys soon. All right, bye everyone.